विश्व की अर्थव्यवस्था में 5वें नंबर पर पहुंच चुके हैं। 8 करोड़ लोगों ने नया कारोबार शुरू किया है और 8 करोड़ लोगों ने कारोबार शुरू किया है तो नहीं, हर कारोबारी ने एक या दो लोगों को रोजगार दिया है। ये भारत न रुकता है, ये भारत न थकता है, ये भारत न हांफता है और न ही ये भारत हारता है। दुनिया के किसी भी टेबल पर मेक इन इंडिया चीज हो तो दुनिया को विश्वास होना चाहिए, इससे बेहतर दुनिया में कुछ नहीं हो सकता है। ये अल्टीमेट होगा। विमेन सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप के साथ आप गांव में जाएंगे तो आपको बैंक वाली दीदी मिलेगी, आपको आंगनवाड़ी वाली दीदी मिलेगी, आपको दवाई देने वाली दीदी मिलेगी। और अब मेरा सपना है 2 करोड़ लखपति दीदी बनाने का। जब देश आजादी के 100 साल मनाएगा उस समय दुनिया में भारत का तिरंगा झंडा, विकसित भारत का तिरंगा झंडा होना चाहिए। चुनो चुनौती सीना तान, चुनो चुनौती सीना तान, जग में बढ़ाओ देश का नाम।
The Indian flag should be seen as a flag of a developed nation in 2047 when we complete 100 years of independence. That's the vision, and that was the underlying message from Prime Minister Modi. Hello and welcome to this special India at 76. We're coming to you live from the CNBC-TV18 studios. I'm Surabhi Upadhyay in Mumbai, and joining me from New Delhi is my colleague Ashmit. Ashmit, good morning and happy Independence Day to you as well as to all of our viewers.
Well, a very good morning to all of our viewers as well as to you, Surabhi. Thank you for that. And of course, it's the 77th Independence Day. The Prime Minister giving a multi-decadal view, not making any major announcement, but nonetheless talking about how this is the opportunity, how the ball is in our court, and perhaps giving us a multi-decadal picture, aiming at 2047 and targeting India as an independent, as a developed country. Now, the Prime Minister revisited all steps taken by his government in the last 9 years, while also laying out his vision for the future. The PM lauded his government's policies to empower women, tackle climate change, and promised to fight corruption and end dynasty and appeasement politics. And our Prime Minister also spoke about the Manipur violence, saying that India stands with the people of Manipur and that the situation is slowly improving in the state. In his concluding remarks, the Prime Minister urged Indians to tap the opportunity to live for the nation and take the country to greater heights.
Well, absolutely. Those were some of the highlights of the speech that we heard. And sort of, it was a mix of talking about some of the hallmarks, the policy hallmarks of the NDA government over the last several years, and giving some hints of it where he made that reference about saying that I hope to inaugurate a lot of the infrastructure programs where we're right now laying the foundation stone. So therefore, talking about or hinting about the future as well, in the hopes that, of course, the NDA would have from the general election. Well, those were the highlights. Let's now introduce, of course, our panel of experts to talk about the road ahead. We have with us former Finance Secretary Secy Garg, A.K. Bhattacharya, Editorial Director at the Business Standard. Also on the show with us is FICCI's Secretary General Shailesh Pathak. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining in. Good morning to all of you, and of course, wish you all a very, very happy Independence Day. Mr. Bhattacharya, if I could ask you first, I mean, when you wear your journalist hat, what stood out for you from the speech today? This was not about announcing new programs or new schemes like the Gati Shakti or the Swachh Bharat mission, understandably so, because next year is election year. So what would you say stood out for you in the speech this time around?
Well, I will just make 3 quick points. One, I think the Prime Minister ticked all the right boxes from his point of view. He talked about defense, he talked about Manipur, he talked about women, he talked about science and technology, he talked about regional aspirations. So from a structural point of view, I think he ticked all the right boxes from his vantage point. That's point number 1. Point number 2 is that this particular speech, which is a strength speech from the ramparts of Red Fort, was different in a sense that it looked less on the past and more on the future. If you do a kind of a search of his speech when it is made available, my sense is that he has spent more time in trying to create a vision for India in the next 24 years till 2047, when he hopes and the nation's aspirations to be a developed country. And I think he's laid down that agenda of work that need to be done. That's the number 2 point I would make. And the third point I would make that this is one of those Independence Day addresses which I would call a pre-election speech, in a sense that he is actually he is outlined his agenda. He has talked about the importance of a stable government, and he has compared it with the problems that you have with an unstable government in the previous 30 years. Previous 20 years, that is before 2014. He has talked about the problems of dynastic politics. He has talked about problems of corruption. He has also talked about problems of appeasement, but he did not dwell on that very much. So I think these are the 3 quick points I would outline at the end, in brief. And 2047 seems to be the running theme of what India needs to do and how India needs to be sitting on that high table among developed countries. That seems to be the overall overarching theme of this Independence Day address. And a difference in this speech was probably for the first time the Prime Minister in an Independence Day address is expressing a clear hope and promising the nation that he would come back to the Red Fort and address the nation on 2024 as well. So he is supremely confident of coming back, his government coming back to power after the general elections.
Oh, yes.
In May 2024.
Well, absolutely. There were several references, pointing towards the level of confidence that the Prime Minister was displaying for sure. Let me bring in Shailesh Pathak into the conversation as well. Mr. Pathak, there was a lot of talk about how India has a place in this new global order, the post-COVID order, where India can sort of lead the world. That was the message that came through. In terms of announcements, as I said, nothing very big, no big-ticket, big-bang announcements, but there was a mention about housing, for instance, and I think a reference towards perhaps more intervention, greater interest rate subvention on housing, particularly for the marginalized. What do you think were the key takeaways for you from an industry and business standpoint?
Thank you. 3 key takeaways. One, the number of 135 million poor people, 13.5 crore, who've come above the poverty line and which are joining the neo-middle class. So that's a much bigger market for the entire private sector. And a lot of them will become entrepreneurs. He gave the example of how many people have got Mudra loans and they have employed people. The second was the number of 10 crore ghost beneficiaries. And essentially, this was leakage and corruption. And those 10 crore beneficiaries did not exist. So the money saved there is being directed towards much more productive expenditure. And the third was his reference to the youth of India and how these people will take India to greater heights. He talked about Bali and how everyone at Bali was asking, in the last G20 about India's digital successes. And I'm happy to say that the digital public infrastructure of India is now an object of emulation. Nandan Nilekani says he'll try for 50 countries in 5 years. So the private sector has really benefited. My mind goes back to 10 years ago when the Prime Minister gave his first speech from the Red Fort in 2014, how much we have changed for the better. Thank you.
Right, let me come in on this conversation. Mr. Garg, you've been waiting patiently. Just want to get your assessment. The view that has been given by the Prime Minister here is a multi-decadal view. The push that he's trying to give is for India to travel from a low-income country to a developed country, to a middle-income country. And that's, in fact, supported by a very recent In fact, just last evening, SBI put out a research paper saying that the weighted mean income is estimated to travel from 13 lakh rupees, where it currently stands, to almost 50 lakh rupees by the year we hit 2047. Just your take on whether you saw a roadmap in this speech as far as this journey to 2047 is concerned.
Thank you. Prime Minister spoke about the notion of the advanced country, India becoming a developed country and advanced economy by 2047. Last year also, if you remember, that is where it started. And he reiterated that sort of goal today. And he was speaking to the people of India. He was speaking to the general masses, and therefore he couched his address in a manner where the people feel enthused, people feel excited about, and people feel good about something like this, that India becoming a developed nation, an advanced nation by 2047. My sense is that this I think was very well achieved, but when we talk about it, the people who go into the reality of these kind of ambitions and goal, we need to go a little bit deeper into it. What exactly we mean by a developed country or an advanced economy? As you know, IMF already classifies 41 countries in the world as advanced countries. The World Bank classifies something like 81 countries as high-income countries. We are not in that 41 or the 80-odd countries which can be called, which are called advanced countries or the high-income countries. We are down in the lower middle class. We have maybe we are about 150th in the world. We have a very long path to travel. Now, to address your question, whether he laid down a path for that or not, I don't think he was required to lay down a path, because when we talk to the people in general, the masses, they don't get into the nitty-gritties. And I was not surprised that that path was missing in that address. He talked about very long terms, about 1,000 years, 2047. What I noted very carefully was the kind of dream narrative which the Prime Minister builds. And he is a very big orator. He connects with people very well. But there is a big change in the narrative which he has been doing it. You would recall in 2014 or before, the narrative was in very specific terms: double the income for farmers by 2022, reduce the oil imports to less than 70% or so, and a whole lot of other very specific new India by 2022. Now the goal post or the ambitions goal has shifted to far more advanced years, far longer, and that narrative is not that specific. That is more general. So I think it will work to sort of excite people in general, common people. But if you do a reality check on this, then the story may not be that good.
Sure. Let me take these thoughts across to Mr. A.K. Bhattacharya. Mr. Bhattacharya, same question for you. We saw whether or not a roadmap is there. Mr. Garg believes it wasn't there. But at the same time, we have Mr. Pathak pointing out that interesting data points are being secured with respect to how the middle class is growing. Just your take on this multi-decadal view given by the Prime Minister going forward, keeping in mind some of the concerns as well that he red flagged. He did red flag inflation, imported inflation as being a concern. He did red flag corruption being a concern. So just your view, a broader multi-decadal view that the Prime Minister is seeking to give.
Well, as Mr. Garg points out, he has set a target of 2047, which is, which is a long-term target. So it's a fact that this Independence Day address does not talk about targets like in the previous years within a year or 2 or 3 years, like farmers' income to be doubled by 2022, or poverty to be, eliminated by such and such year. So I think that clearly there is you don't see a target that has been set, except one target, which is that India will become among the top 3 countries by 2029, which is when the next government completes its tenure. So that's the only specific target. Otherwise, every target is by 2047, and the specific the game plan of how this to be done. But I don't expect an Independence Day address to outline the specific action points that needed to be worked on for achieving the status of India being a developed country by 2047. I think in some point in his speech, he does mention that this is something that the youth of the country, the people of the country, the bureaucracy, the civil servants, industry people should join hands and make sure that this goal is achieved. So I'm not disappointed that the blueprint for how to be a developed country by 2047 is not the Independence Day address. But what is there in this Independence Day address is something that, in a sense, that as Mr. Pathak was pointing out, that there are some headline points which, like about 100 million fake Indians. We did not have any birth certificates, and they were there. Now that's something which will do a lot of rounds in the social media circles, I'm sure, in the days to come. But this speech will stand out more because of the manner in which he is trying to rededicate the nation to 2047 goal of India becoming an advanced country, and also using the Independence Day address as launching his government's bid to return to power. And I think that's something that is too obvious for anyone not to notice.
Okay, fair point. Let me go back to Mr. Shailesh Pathak. Mr. Pathak, let me also try and bring in some of the specifics. No major announcements, but we did hear about this, let's say this Vishwakarma scheme, where the government is, looking at disbursing, I think, up to 15,000 crore rupees to artisans, skilled workers. You mentioned the amounts that he outlined under the Mudra scheme. Now, as we look at, the roadmap ahead in the post-COVID world, what would you say is the state of the, SME enterprises, MSMEs, and what more needs to be done? How would you rank and rate the government's efforts in terms of helping this part of the, the business and economy of it in terms of the post-COVID crisis?
Thank you for that. In fact, I'll share with you, FICCI has just about to complete a survey of around 700 SMEs in India, essentially on their sustainability and digitalization. And we'll be very happy to share the results in a few weeks. The news is good. And today's speech by the Prime Minister drove home the point, as you said, the Vishwakarma Jayanti scheme, drove home the point that the small people, the carpenters, the electricians, the people who work with their hands, are as important as large corporate sectors. And let me assure you on behalf of large corporate sector that there is no large corporate sector without an ecosystem of smaller and smaller vendors. So everything is important. The highlight for me was the 200,000 crores, I think 2 lakh crores spent on the Jal Jeevan mission, which, as you know, is providing taps to every rural household. I was looking at the numbers. In 2019 August, 1 out of 6 women in rural India had access to a tap. Today, 4 out of 6 women have access to a tap. And this is going to become 6 on 6 in a few months. I think that is remarkable as a health outcome, disease prevalence will go down, the quality of life of rural women will come up. And coming back to the enterprise issue, I think the payments infrastructure transformation in India has enabled poor and smaller SMEs and micro enterprises to build up a credit history. So instead of going to a money lender and taking 2% per month kind of loans, they will be able to access the formal credit system. And the big story, according to me, I think what the Prime Minister was essentially saying was, we are very happy at the kind of speed and scale of progress in the last 10 years. And he also said, when we lay the foundation stone, we come back and inaugurate the completed project. So here's to speed and scale in the growth of India.
Gentlemen, stay on. We have more to talk about, more to discuss, but we do need to take a break right now. So we'll do that and come right back. The conversation continues. India at 76. Welcome back. We are looking back at the highlights of Prime Minister Modi's speech and the agenda that he has outlined ahead and the references he has given, saying that India really has a new place in a new global order that we've seen emerge post-COVID. Well, our panel of experts is with us. Mr. Garg, I want to come to you because you said that the Prime Minister is a great orator, but, beyond the passion and the headlines, there are some nuances that we need to analyze further. So I want to ask you a little more about that. What would you say, if there was a point of disagreement, what would that be for you? There was a lot of reference towards the middle class as well. He acknowledged inflation, for instance. He acknowledged, some of the tax changes that have been done, saying that that would benefit the middle class. What did you make of that part of the speech as well?
If you look from that point of view, again linked to the notion or the goal of advanced India by 2047, and let me bring the claim of India becoming third largest economy during the next tenure of the Prime Minister or the Lok Sabha, whichever way you put it. You would note that Prime Minister in the initial remarks made a reference to India becoming the largest and the most populous country in the world, right? I don't think anybody would credit the government or the Prime Minister with that achievement. We should look at the economic growth, third largest economy, also from that point of view, how much it's because of the momentum which is there for last many years, and how much the government policy and the decisions have contributed to that. From that point of view, as you know, the biggest constituent of the economic growth is, since we measure them in dollars, it is the dollar GDP growth. The dollar GDP growth of India in last 9 years has been only around 7%, whereas many other countries have much larger growth. That is, even in post-COVID period, or last three years or so, I wrote about that. Both US and China, which did not grow in terms of GDP in their own currencies, actually added one India during this period, right? Therefore, if we want to look at the significance of becoming third largest economy, India will become, because we have to cross Japan and Germany. Japan is not growing for last 15 years. Germany has also now stopped growing, having grown up the population, stabilization and all. So that third largest economy by 27, 28 or 29 will definitely happen, whether the government does anything or does not do anything, right? What we should be looking at, if we want to actually make India progress, we should look at where the opportunity for growth lies. And the biggest opportunity for growth today is the diversion from China or because rest of the world wants the industry to move away from China. Can we grab that as our share? Or our competitors, and in that, to my mind, our competitors are in that class of what I call, which have $100 million of GDP or 10 million population. So that's the middle economies which we are really competing. And if we look at the last 10 years or so, the growth of India in that group is not the largest. In fact, we are, if you look at post-COVID 3 years, we are 9th largest growing economy in that. If you look at for last 9 years, we are 3rd or 4th largest in that. So if you want to actually grab this opportunity and make India an advanced economy, we would need to concentrate on number one, taking as much of the diversion of industry from China. And secondly, in two big areas, the digital economy. There was a lot of talk about digital India and all, but if you look at our real growth in the digital side, hardware, we are not doing really great at all. Our computers or IT hardware is not even 1/10 of what, in terms of export, of what Vietnam does. Forget about China. So, and the environmental side, so a lot of investment in the environmental infrastructure and all. So there is enormous amount of opportunity available. We can do it, but are we taking up the right kind of policies to get there?
That's an interesting perspective, Mr. Garg. Let me, in fact, take that across to Mr. Mohindru, who's, in fact, Mr. Garg, paved the way for a perfect situation where we can pose a question to Mr. Mohindru. Mr. Mohindru, welcome to the show. A very happy Independence Day to you as well. The question I want to ask is the concern that is being raised by Mr. Garg here, that India is aiming for that China plus one strategy. But so far, while Digital India has been a resounding success, I think clear from number of takers we found for some of these OpenStack solutions from countries looking for solutions from the Indian digital stack, there is still much to be desired as far as the hardware side is concerned. Just your perspective on the challenges that we face. You pointed out on previous occasions that India faces a very tough competition from countries such as Mexico, Thailand, Vietnam. How do we overcome this challenge? That's the question that Mr. Garg is raising.
Yeah, thank you, Ashmit. But I'm not sure whether Mr. Garg has the numbers right, because we've grown to cross $100 billion of electronic manufacturing 2023, which is almost 300% compared to when this government started. That's number one. In mobile phone manufacturing, we have grown 1,800% from $2.34 billion to $44 billion. And our exports, we were importing about 80% of our domestic demand in 2015. We are exporting $11 billion of mobile phones last year. And this year, we've already crossed $5 billion in the first 4 months. So there has been, compared to the situation 7 years back, 8 years back, there has been a huge improvement. Now, the specific issue of China plus one and how much we are taking out of that, that I agree with him that we have not performed brilliantly. This process has just, started since the punitive tariffs on China in 2018-19 and the CHIPS Act, etc. So that movement has started. Now, most of that has been taken by countries like Vietnam and Mexico. How we are going to manage that? Now we have structured policies, very deeply thought through, which is the PLI on smartphones. It is really working well. And at the bottom, the foundations of this electronic industry, which is semiconductors, display, cells, etc., all those are now in the works in a very deep and profound manner. At the same time, the other verticals, other than mobile phones, which is consumer electronics, IT hardware, which is laptops, desktops, tablets, and hearable wearables, other electronics like strategic electronics and auto electronics and industrial electronics, all those are in the works. The $300 billion vision of 26 is another leap of 300% over what we have achieved till now, which is $100 billion, and export touching $100 billion. Now, all of this there is not so much growth in electronics globally. So much of this will come as, displacement from our neighbor to India, and a lot of it will come from export. There'll be organic growth of demand in India also, but that will not be as much as what we are trying to. Now, the $300 billion is the base on which we'll be able to build the largest and the most profound electronic manufacturing industry in the world, which will take us about a decade to cross $1 trillion of manufacturing. And I think here we should not look at so much, over intellectualized that so much of value addition must be there, etc. Once we achieve scale, this process of deepening of the industry automatically starts happening. And that is what we really require, that we need a large scale, and also the electronic industry firing in all cylinders, not only on the cylinder of mobile phones, but on all cylinders, which is the verticals I mentioned, and the other supply chain, other than sub-assemblies, which is components, semiconductors, and so on. This process has begun and it's a very feverish process. I'm very optimistic that along with this, if we continue to improve ease of doing business and competitiveness, to become the largest economy, third largest economy doesn't excite us that much as it was mentioned. At 18% of the population, India should be at least 10% of the world's economy by 2047. That will be a very robust target, and I think we are on the way to achieve it. The next 10 years look extremely exciting, extremely exciting to us.
You raised some interesting points. We'll come back to you to get your thoughts on them. For now, let's also get Mr. D.K. Joshi in on this conversation. Mr. Joshi, a very happy Independence Day to you. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. I want to get your sense on a couple of points that the Prime Minister had raised as a part of his speech. One was ratings agency. India has largely held a position for last very many years that India is not fairly rated, and that is a concern going forward. That's number one. The second issue that the Prime Minister raised was imported inflation. I just want to get your thoughts on these two concerns, not from a multi-decade view, but from the immediate perspective that we are looking at over the next couple of quarters.
The second question first.
I believe you're on mute, Mr. Joshi.
Yeah. The second question first. I think the imported inflation has always, I think, been an issue in India. I think because if the price of oil rises, crude oil rises, if the price of commodities rise, if the price of metals rise, I think they all spill over to us. If the price of fertilizer rises, because we import a lot of them. So that, I think, and these factors have been at play in the last 2-3 years. I mean, if you look at the wholesale price index inflation, it was 13% last year. Now the commodity prices declined, so it is in the negative territory. So I think the imported inflation part always plays out, and we are vulnerable to specific things like crude oil, etc. I think world itself has seen very high inflation in the last 2-3 years. I think India saw relatively less inflation. If you want to come to the current context, I think what I was saying is that commodity prices, even crude prices, they are rising, but they're less than last year. If you take food out of CPI, I think the inflation is only 4.5%. So it is actually the most volatile and idiosyncratic component of the consumer price basket, which is causing inflation right now. And if I split food into two parts, cereals and vegetables, I think vegetables have been in the news of late, largely tomato, etc. I think these are weather related and they have a short cycle of 2 to 3 months. And I think the prices decline equally sharply. I mean, take you back a couple of months back, tomato was selling at rock bottom prices. So the worry, I think, for me is on the cereals front, and where I think the weather plays a very important role. Cereal inflation has been very high in India, and government is trying to intervene by supplying food grains at lower than market prices, trying to sell them, and I think that will take some time to bear fruit. But yeah, I think the key monitorable for us is cereals as well as pulses. On your first question, unfortunately, I can't answer that. I come from CRISIL, which is, I think, S&P is the owner. They do the ratings. We don't do the ratings.
Mr. Joshi, happy Independence Day to you, Surabhi here. So slightly broader question, and you are the expert, from the economic standpoint on the panel here. So tell us, in this big vision, the multi-decadal vision of becoming a developed economy by 2047, what are the next milestones and how feasible is the vision? Yes, we're very passionate about it, but realistically speaking, what chance do we stand and what should be the immediate goalposts that we should aim at in order to get to that landmark?
Well, I think that's a pretty big target, and I think we should have big targets. That's true, but I think it will require at least 7.5% GDP growth over the next, sustained over the next couple of years, something like which the East Asian economies had done. Now, I think it's very hard there are too many factors at play, so I can't look that far into the future and say what kind of growth we'll achieve. Coming to a little shorter period, we did a report, S&P did a report on India's moment, released it a couple of days back. I think that was pointing towards an average growth of 6.7% per annum till the end of this decade. And I think that we believe is feasible because of two factors. One is the focus on infrastructure, the physical infrastructure creation. I think that will slowly bring in private investment, attract private investment also, I think, which are not very aggressive right now because of the environment. And then I think, as was pointed out by somebody earlier, I think the interventionist policy like the PLI schemes helps front load some of the investments that are taking place. Capacity utilization in the economy is at pretty high levels, as I think the RBI policy had pointed out. And there is foreign interest in India. I think one of the reasons why India has not been able to attract so much of capital from outside in the diversification strategy that is now taking place across the world, diversification of supply chains, I think is the initial conditions. I think you need very hardwired infrastructure. You need very superior logistics, where actually India is making progress. So it will take some time. I think the intent from the foreign participation is definitely there. I think if we speed up the process of enabling environment, I think we'll get more investments going ahead. So that is one. And the second driver of growth, at least in the next couple of years, is going to be the dividends that we get from creation of digital infrastructure, because it is a platform for innovations, which the PM also pointed out. It is the payment systems have become very efficient, and the subsidy to the needy, I think, is going with less and less leakages. And so I think all that is efficiency enhancing. So efficiency and capital, these are going to be the two key drivers. The challenge is going to be on the labor side, because the labor force participation in India is very low, and particularly of women. Unless we upskill the labor force, I think they will not be able to participate very actively in the growth process. And I think we might end up providing them the subsidies, etc. So I think that the making the growth employment generating, I think that is the key challenge that we will face over the next couple of years.
Okay, all right, got that. Well, gentlemen, stay on. We will take the conversation forward, but right now do have to take a very, very quick break. We'll come right back and the conversation will continue.
Well, welcome back to this special broadcast right here on CNBC TV18 on India's 77th Independence Day. Mr. Pathak, let me come to you, and I'll just borrow one point that Mr. Joshi had made with respect to how there is an urgent need for upskilling women. Now, this ties very closely in with India's message that the Prime Minister sought to give out. He spoke about women participation as having the most number of pilots. He talked about self-help groups. He talked about creating lakpatis out of rural women. Just want to understand your take on the role that you see the private sector playing, that we go beyond tokenism, we go beyond the token representative on the board of a company to ensure that there is greater women participation in the workforce and not simply the leadership.
I think I would wholeheartedly agree with what you just said. The Prime Minister, remember, said that it is about women-led development. It is not, with women, it is led by women. And symbols are important. The two armed forces officers who helped with unfurling of the flag at the Red Fort today were women. And yes, we had a visiting delegation of executive directors from the World Bank, and they were asking about, women participation. And we told them that about 12 to 14% of the commercial pilots in India are women. There is no other country with double-digit women pilots. But coming to specifics, FICCI was the secretariat for the G20 Empower, which just concluded in Gandhinagar. And we were talking about how to increase the role of women in the private sector and in entrepreneurship and so on. And one key learning was that many women who work in the informal economy in India do not get counted as working women. All these self-help groups that have largely women are not counted. And if you really add that, and this is not only India, this is about the global south, the proportion of women in the labor force suddenly shows a marked improvement. But over the last 10 years, we should all appreciate the way women have been one of the key focus attention of all government schemes, I would say. I mean, the toilets that we've gotten built over the last 10 years largely benefit women. I earlier talked about the taps in homes largely benefit women. I talked about the payment systems. One of the things that we realized during the G20 Empower deliberations is that women entrepreneurs and men entrepreneurs, the key difference is can they network, and their digital solutions do not discriminate on the basis of gender. So over the next 5 to 10 years, I see women playing a much bigger leadership role in India's development. Just to give you a small example, over 96 years of FICCI's existence, for around 80 years, we did not have women presidents. In the last 10 years, we've had 3 women presidents. And my challenge to women entrepreneurs at G20 Empower was, over the next 50 years, can we have 25 women presidents?
Right, Mr. Pathak, thank you so much for that. We're running out of time now, so we're coming to a point where we come down to capsules, 60-second capsules. Final words from our panelists. Mr. Mohindru, let me come to you. You talked about how there is much work to be done. I just want to get your closing comments in terms of taking this journey forward. What are 2 major challenges that you see that the government will need to address in the immediate future?
I think there is, on the women participation, just 10 seconds, the experience has been absolutely fantastic as far as we are concerned. Especially in the south of India, it's a surreal experience when you see almost entire plant of 15,000 or 20,000 manned by young girls who within 8 weeks or 10 weeks are able to produce the most sophisticated products in the world with better efficiency and better quality than the hallowed Chinese manufacturing system. So that is remarkable, and we get tremendous confidence from that. And I hope that this is can be replicated in the north of India also, where women participation is not so great. The second important thing which I mentioned was that, which I didn't mention earlier, but specialized large global companies out of India will be the key.
Sure.
we have very few global champions.
Sure.
And that is not how a tiger economy is created.
Absolutely,
You see,
Mr.
the large
Pathak.
horizontal.
Mr. Pathak, sorry, I'm sorry to come in over there because we're short on time. I want to give that opportunity to all of our panelists. That's why those bullet capsules. But I'll take that point forward. Large global Indian MNCs is something that you've proposed. Mr. Pathak, let me come to you. As we're looking at this big target ahead of us, 2047, from a policy and governance standpoint, what should be top of mind to help industry achieve it?
I would say number one, better cities in India. Because the cities we build and the cities we maintain are not globally competitive. And that is where most of the private sector does its operations. The second thing, I think a lot of good has happened, but something on contract enforcement and dispute resolution is sorely needed because we are getting outcompeted by global peers. And the last thing is, yes, we will have global leaders and champions, and we will have, 100 crore companies going into 200, 300 crores in the next 5 years. The next 10 years is going to see more growth than the last 70.
Mr. Garg, let me come to you now. Your closing comments in terms of this roadmap that you were looking for at the beginning. That roadmap you said was missing. What are the ingredients that are now required for the government to put in place to realize these aspirations? A quick capsule of 60 seconds.
So I guess this is government's biggest contribution can come through the policy. And in terms of policy, my two takeaways or two suggestions are, one, go back to what your 2014 mantra was: minimum government, maximum governance. That would imply privatization, giving the private sector the scope. We have lost that track. So privatize the public sector, both financial and non-financial, and don't bring the license permit Raj, etc., and allow the private sector to grow. That's one. Second, the government's job is to actually govern and create the macroeconomic environment and conditions for that, and therefore refine the policies of redistribution. The Prime Minister talked about a lot of freebies and appeasement policies, but the central government also does a lot of them. So free food, free fertilizer, free and farmers, all these are freebies, etc. Those need to be stopped and converted into workable sort of welfare for the people. So, and the governance agenda is immense. We actually are not a very well-governed society. Macroeconomic environment, which the public goods and services bring up, is actually much poorer than what it should be. So if we can focus on these two, perhaps the government can lay the foundations and the path for the...
Sure. Mr. Joshi, let me ask you, from a macroeconomic standpoint, what should be the, that dosage or the bullet that you would want to see the government administer to the economy to help us realize our potential?
Well, I think we have embarked on making manufacturing our key growth engine. I think for that, you need relentless focus on creating infrastructure and logistics. I think even now, despite improving, our rankings improving, I think they're still lagging behind. So I think that is very critical for the success of manufacturing. I think the second is, as I said earlier, I think somehow we have to focus on, we have success stories as were being pointed out, but at a pan-India level, I think the PLFS data, which is produced by the government itself, shows that the labor force participation for women has gone down. There could be some measurement issues, but I think we need to focus a little bit more on how to make growth more inclusive for women at an overall level. Then I think the global environment is very challenging, and I think the geopolitics are shifting. In this environment, how do you compete and cooperate to protect your national interest, I think becomes foremost. So I think the foreign policy also becomes very, very critical in promoting the growth. The new alliances that you forge, how they are going to help you in the FTAs, etc.
Indeed, significant work being put in there. The government hoping to realize, the Prime Minister hoping to realize the benefits of the 3 Ds, democracy, demography, as well as diversity. But that's unfortunately all the time that we have on this special broadcast. I'd like to thank all of our panelists, Mr. Garg, Mr. Pathak, Mr. Mohindru, Mr. Joshi. Thank you so much for taking out time early this morning for sharing some insights and perspective.
Thank you very much, and we wish all our viewers a very happy Independence Day.